Today on Locked On Canadiens, a special treat. Lauren Kelly joins us to talk Owen Beck, Filip Mesar, and all the other OHL prospects in the Habs system. And that's coming up on today's Locked On Canadiens.
Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 735 of Locked On Canadiens. We thank you for making us your first listen. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. My name is Laura Saba, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm without my wonderful co-host Scott Matla, but I have somebody equally wonderful joining me to take his place. Lauren Kelly, lead OHL Scout for Elite Prospects, is here with us, back by popular demand. In fact, when I mentioned on yesterday's episode that Lauren would be back, I had some delightful DMs and I had some delightful comments in my DMs. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your time. How are you doing this evening?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be back and glad that my last appearance on this show was well received, I guess. I'm good. Just excited to discuss some of the OHL prospects in the Canadian system.
So you were kind of our resident Owen Beck expert even before Owen Beck was a Montreal Canadiens prospect. He was definitely somebody that was on Scott's radar and some of our listeners' radar. But now he's a Montreal Canadien. And honestly, if you ask me, he's a freaking steal if you look at where he was drafted and how far he's come so far in his first offseason. So obviously, let's start with your thoughts on what he's done before he got sent back to the AHL. Like, he had a really good camp with the Canadiens, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that there was a player like more consistent, more dynamic, really proved himself game in and game out at practice, in preseason or in training camp scrimmages and that sort of thing. I feel a little like bad because I think I had gone on Game Over Montreal, and then I came on this podcast and I just basically like sang Owen Beck's praises like for the entirety of the duration. And then I think that hype during training camp started to get out of control a little bit. And so I would just like to caution everyone to like rein it in a little bit. Like he's still only 18 and there's still a ways to go. And obviously he didn't make the team out of training camp or, get any preseason action. But I mean, you can't really deny how he played. I mean, he probably deserved at least one game, if not, but, it's never a bad thing to hold a player it's never a bad thing to, have a player play another year in junior. So I think, the Habs make the right decision, getting him another season in the OHL, especially considering he didn't play 2 seasons ago. So yeah, I mean, it's just been full steam ahead for him ever since he was drafted.
Yeah, and that's something that I think a lot of people have been talking about because we've talked about it, and obviously we are really hype on this show. We're really hype about Owen Beck, particularly my co-host, who I have a favorite prospect. I like the short King Lane Hudson the most. For obvious reasons, I am 5'0". So I'm a big fan of his. And I love that dynamic, fast defenseman. Like the creative mind that he has. But I think the way that I would describe Owen Beck really is extremely steady, right? So one thing that we've talked about, like I said, we've hyped him so much that people are like, oh, he's going to make the Habs next season. He could as early as next season, which is not out of the realm of possibility. But I think we should first focus on, his start to the season in the OHL and see how he's been doing. And if he's on track. I'm pretty sure the last time we talked about this, we talked about prospects like this that are, so hyped that could easily, be groomed in the NHL. When they go back to their respective leagues, you really want to see some dominance. Like, what are we seeing from Owen Beck at this point?
Well, a lot of the question marks after his draft season were, he's great consistency. He's a really high floor prospect. And I think some scouts kind of get blinded to those high floor prospects where it's almost like guaranteed, or, if they don't reach that floor, it's a disappointment. And there were a lot of questions surrounding his offense after last season. He didn't produce like a first round pick. And obviously he went, one pick in the first pick in the second round. So he might as well have been a first round pick. But The one thing that I have been really impressed by this season is his, he stepped up offensively. Like his shot looks a lot stronger. It's more powerful. It's more deceptive. The release, he gets it off more quickly. I wonder if he picked up some pointers from a certain Habs sniper in training camp, but that's been basically the biggest difference. I mean, he's working well with his line mates again this season. Just that consistency at both ends of the ice. The main thing is just that the execution is a lot better this season. The puck is going in for him. He had that 6-point night back in October, which was mind blowing. And then, I think he's had, multi-point games in almost every single, or multi-goal games in almost every single game this season. So it's been quite impressive that he's been, finishing. He's on pace for 50 goals this season in the OHL, which would be absolutely incredible if he can get there. To kind of, I think he had finished the season with 51 points last year. I think he's on pace for almost 100 this year. So that would be the offensive step that, scouts had been looking to see from him this year. And if he can get there, I think, sky's the limit.
That's the thing. I love how you said sky's the limit, because I believe it was Jeff Gorton. So on this podcast, we've talked a lot about the 2 podcast episodes that Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton did. One on the Knuckles Nyland podcast, Ron Knuckles, the other one on the Sick podcast with Tony Marinaro. And I'm pretty sure it was Jeff Gorton that said this to Tony Marinaro. He said, people always talk about his floor, but like, don't give this guy a ceiling just yet. You said the sky's the limit. I think that was one of the things that, and I think the production aspect of it probably came a lot into those reports, where that this kid has a high floor, but his ceiling might not be as high as we would want. But now the Canadiens are in a position where if they play their cards right, and Owen Beck, hopefully with injury luck and all that, like everything goes right for him. He does all the work. The Habs develop him right. He could be the number 2 center behind Nick Suzuki. Like that's something that, like, my bold prediction was that's what we're going to see when they're a contending team. Owen Beck's going to be the second line center on this team, right? So again, we are pretty hype about Owen Beck on this podcast. But my question to you is, like, what do you think are the next steps that he needs to take in order to, let's say his ceiling is like second line center behind Nick Suzuki on a good Habs team. Like, what are the steps you think he needs to take next in his development? And do you agree that maybe next year, like, let's not rush him into the NHL. Let's see how he's doing, and maybe he can do the AHL. I mean, Caden Gooley didn't need the AHL, but you never know, right? So, like, what are your thoughts on this? And this is like purely Lauren's opinion based on her very, very informed scouting. Nobody yell at her because you disagree.
Here's the thing about Owen Beck is that he already played such a mature game last season, even though, obviously the offensive production wasn't there. There's not really a whole lot that I would, need to see from a player like him to, improve upon. It's just about maintaining, again, that really consistent 2-way game, not sacrificing the defense for the offense, not that he does already. Just maintaining that kind of production throughout the season. If he can break 100 points in the OHL this season, I mean, I don't see why he couldn't push for a Canadiens roster spot next season. I don't think he's AHL eligible next year. No. I think he would, that next year would be his 19-year-old season. So I think
he'd have to stay in the OHL because he wasn't drafted in the first round, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think he's got one more year. But honestly, I really don't see, him being too far away from, an NHL spot. I think it's just a matter of, maintaining that consistency. The offense is going to come. If he can play himself into the conversation and make Canada's World Junior team, I think that would be an awesome step forward. I'm sure they're keeping an eye on him now. I mean, his goal scoring production, his 2-way play. He's a player who could really thrive in a short tournament like that. So I think that would be a great step forward. And obviously, if, he and Mississauga can have a deep playoff run next spring, that'll probably help a long way too.
And, we love Owen Beck a lot, and we'd love to talk about him for half an hour or, 5 episodes a week, but we can't do that because there's other Habs prospects that we're excited to talk about. And that's coming up in just one moment. We're going to talk Filip Mesar. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. And as you know, betonline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and even esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, which I know you do because you're listening to this one right now, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So where the game starts for Filip Mesar is a little bit confusing because there's a lot of talk when he was first drafted about where he would end up playing and, were the Canadiens going to send him to the AHL. He is obviously eligible. In the previous segment, we were kind of confused, but they ended up sending him to the OHL, which there was a lot of talk about him like not wanting to do that and maybe wanting to go to Europe. But what are your thoughts, Lauren, on how he's been doing so far? And, has this been a positive step for him? Because from what I can tell, he's not on a great team.
Yeah, that's to put it lightly. Kitchener has really, really struggled this season. I mean, before Meshar got there, I think they were just struggling to stay afloat. The team as a whole couldn't stop pucks. They couldn't score. They needed that kind of offensive spark to kind of lift the team up a little bit. And I think when Meshar arrived I think mid-October, that was kind of the spark they needed. I mean, he had that 4-point game in his debut. Everything looked like it was, going to keep trending upward for Kitchener. Obviously, the results have not quite been there. I think this is still a team that's probably not going to make the playoffs, or at least very, very much struggled to make the playoffs. I think they're 4th in their division right now. As far as Meshar's like individual performance, I mean, he's looked fine. I don't think, it's fair to say that, he's been lights out. He's been dominant. I don't know that, it's going to be a bit of an adjustment for a player who's, never played in this league before. It might be unfair to expect him to kind of dominate when he's still kind of adjusting to pace, adjusting to different rush routes and patterns. A lot of his struggles offensively right now are, he has to work better on gaining the inside and not just kind of staying on the perimeter and trying to create that way. He's adjusting to new line mates. Kitchener constantly shuffles the lines on a game-to-game basis to try and get something going if, the game is not working in their favor. It's been a kind of a learning curve for Meshar, but, I don't really think that, that it's going to stay this way. I'm sure as the season progresses, he's just going to keep getting stronger, continue to build, get more comfortable, living in a new country, playing with these new teammates. It's just, there's ways to go, but, he's probably going to be trending upwards.
I think it's interesting what you said because, that was one of the knocks on him is that when he was drafted, a lot of people, let's admit, a lot of people in this market were not familiar with him. Like we can't sit here and pretend we're experts on Meshar because most of us would be lying. But one of the reports on him was mostly that, like he does tend to hover around the perimeter a lot more and he does need to work on that aspect of his game. But everybody kept talking about his high ceiling. And that to me has me really curious because the Canadiens obviously saw something in him that, we didn't necessarily see. And it's not like there wasn't interest in him at all. It's just that he happened to be available where they picked and people expected them to pick probably somebody else. And he's definitely somebody that I like, I don't buy into the narrative that they just picked him because they wanted to keep Slafkovsky happy or keep them together or whatever. Like that kind of stuff is like romantic fantasy. Let's not romanticize drafting, right? Drafting is essentially like gambling your entire career on one evening, especially when you have so many draft picks and you have the first overall. So like, I think for me, what I've kind of wanted to see from him is that I think the context matters a lot, is that I still can't really figure out what he is, right? Watching the games, and admittedly, I'm only catching some of the games, right? Like that's why we have people like you on, and Hattie obviously watches him pretty closely. I still can't figure out what he is, like as a player, like what exactly is he? Is he a skilled winger? Is he is he like offensively gifted? Is he somebody that like we just haven't seen his like defensive play at all? I really can't figure it out. And again, I'm not an expert, but like I'd like to see like what kind of where you would envision him. Like let's say everything pans out in his development, like where you would envision him on a full NHL team.
Well, I think long-term projection, like you said, if everything goes according to plan, this is a top 6 winger that we're talking about in Meshar. Obviously, it's going to be a while to get there. I don't expect him to push for an NHL spot next season. He's probably, if he does fine in the OHL this season, I would probably expect Montreal to look at seeing how he does in the AHL, if, training camp, that sort of thing, if, they feel like he's still not quite ready, or, I mean, they could send him back to the OHL if they wanted to. It kind of really just depends on, his season. I mean, we haven't really seen him take off offensively aside from that first game. So I would be looking for, increased production, and not just, numbers. Numbers are one side of the story, but how he's creating his offense. Is he just shooting from the sides and getting lucky and beating goalies top shelf? Or is he, really trying to penetrate the inside, trying to outwork defenders, work down low in the cycle, win battles? How is he producing offensively? And, is there room for improvement? Always. But if he can show the kind of adapting to offense in, the OHL, different ways to produce, instead of just, being that kind of perimeter player, relying on his skill, relying on his hands to, produce, then, definitely I would say that top six isn't out of the question, top six winger. I think, in an ideal scenario, it'd be cool to see him and Slafkovsky on the same line. Just, obviously narrative and storyline and all of that. But, there is room for improvement, and he has to, get there.
And I think the thing about him is that everything about his demeanor suggests that he will do the work. It just feels like right now, and I'm always curious about this, because you have a lot of good players on bad teams, and you have good players on good teams, and I always wonder how you think it affects development. Like, and I think, a lot of it was like, remember the debates we would have about Shane Wright last year? It was like ad nauseum we would talk about it, and it would be like, well, his team is bad, right? Like, his team was not good. So like, I wonder, like, do you think it helps for someone to like kind of be the guy on a bad team and just have to do everything that kind of helps his development? Or is it better to just like play amongst your peers, like your other top players? Let's say, I don't want to say elite or superstar, but other top players. Like, that's just a personal opinion question.
Right. So here's the thing. I'm going to use an example for this upcoming draft. Cameron Allen and Guelph. Guelph is about just as bad as Kitchener. They're kind of fighting each other for 1-2 as far as last in the conference goes. He has been really, really poor to start the season. And I think a lot of it looks like he's trying to do it all. He's trying to be everywhere. He's trying to make things happen offensively. He's trying to do too much in the defensive zone because, they're kind of all over the place. And I think in that kind of scenario, you would like to see a player like that, because he was supposed to be probably a top 10, top 15 pick in this upcoming draft.
We had our eye on him.
Yeah, he's not playing like one right now. And I think a lot of it has to do with, the team he's on. It's kind of a disarray. They're not sure. This was a Guelph team we expected to push for, a playoff run. And, obviously things just haven't fallen into place there. So I think, as much as you would like to say, that players, they want to be the guy on their team. I mean, you look at Connor Bedard out in Regina, it's just him and maybe Tanner Howe. And he is on the verge of maybe never playing in the WHL playoffs in his entire career there. So, as far as, wanting a player to be the guy, it's great for a player like that to kind of get that responsibility and be able to play top minutes in both special teams and be trusted by their coach in those situations. At the same time, you don't want them to have to do everything, because then it's going to start detracting from some of the other areas of their game where they might need to focus on, or maybe their offense starts to slide a little bit, or, defensively, they're just unsure because they have to be doing 20 different things on the ice because, not everyone else is kind of up to that kind of level that, the coach is relying on. So I don't think Meshar is in that situation in Kitchener, like Allen or Bedard situation. Kitchener has some firepower, Francesco Pinelli, Ari Valetti. It's just a matter of, for him, trying to kind of focus in on himself, work with his lineups, play shift by shift, and try not to, get distracted by, feeling like he has to do everything. Because I don't think that it's fair to ask of a player like him to have to do everything. This is a learning curve in the OHL this season for him. So just keep working on a shift by shift basis, and he should be, pulling himself out of this kind of little bit of a scoring funk he's in right now.
I think we should check in at the end of the OHL season and see how he's improved on those little things, because that's how I'm judging the NHL team, right? It's like we know that they're not going to be great. We thought they would be worse than they are, but what I was looking is at game by game, all of these young players, you know, your Caden Goulies, your Nick Suzuki's, your Kirby Ducks, game by game, are they improving their habits? Are they working on their flaws? Are they improving on the things that a contending team would need, right? So that's how I was judging that season. So I think maybe at the end of the season, let's check in on Meshar again, if not throughout the season, but definitely let's see, you know, if he's improved the aspects of his game that he's needed to work on in order to, you know, become a more well-rounded, more promising NHL prospect. But in the meantime, there's still some other guys in the OHL that belong to the Habs system. So we're going to talk about that in literally just 1 second. All right. So we have crammed everybody else into the last segment because we really wanted to focus a lot on Owen Beck and on Filip Mesar. But I'm going to ask Lauren to check in. Like a quick, I guess, let's do a quick summary so we won't run out of time.
Sure.
We'll start with Cedrick Guidon. How's that going right now?
This is not quite unprecedented, but he's top 5 in OHL scoring right now. This is a very, very smart player, very toolsy, kind of like Owen Beck light. You know, the tools aren't as high, you know, quality maybe at times, but his intelligence is lending itself to, you know, offensive production. And he's a very smart player. He puts himself in those positions to succeed. He's able to read and process plays very quickly. Owen Sound has been a very strong team this season. So that also, you know, helps as far as offensive production goes. And, you know, playmaking has been, you know, that question mark for Guidon. And it's a lot more consistent this season. And I wonder at times if maybe his, you know, goal scoring or his shooting has suffered a little bit because of it, but it's really encouraging to see that his playmaking has improved.
And that's, I think, the thing is that, you know, oftentimes when a player has a particular lack in his game, he like overcompensates for that for a while. And the question is always, can they do it all at once? Can they put it all together? Like, you've mastered your defensive play, or you've mastered your scoring, or you've mastered whatever. And can you then put it all together and become a more well-rounded person? Like, I look at him, and to me, he often seems like an afterthought because we talk so much about so many of these other guys that the Canadiens have in their system that, you know, Scott sometimes has to remind me that he even exists. And I feel bad. But like, I think to me, you know, if he does pan out, he's a very good value pick. Like, I'd call him a good value pick in the last draft. Like, I can't stop saying how happy I am with the way the Canadiens drafted this past year. And so I'm really, really hoping that, you know, coming up, there's going to be another one of those like intelligent drafts. They might not have as high a pick or as many picks, right, but I'm hoping that they come up with another intelligent, like, you know, I keep calling them steals, but like just like a good efficient draft. Like, you use your picks well and wisely. That's what I want. And so now we're going to talk about Logan Mailloux, who is, I think, one of the big question marks, obviously, because he didn't play much last season. And then we would keep getting asked about him, and we keep going like, he's played 12 games. Like, we don't know the answer to your question because he's only played 12 games. So now he's back to playing. So I'm wondering like what your thoughts are on him, because like if you kind of pay attention to like what other people are saying, some people think that he's the worst player and some people think that he's the best player. And I wonder how much of that has to do with the people who think he's amazing, like they're looking at his shot, and the people who think that he's not that great are looking at everything else he's doing on the ice. Like, that's my question.
I think the answer is he's probably somewhere in the middle. Just on a numbers basis, the production is not otherworldly. Like, it's kind of just, you know, average. I mean, he's obviously defenseman. We're not expecting him to put up like 100 points a season. That's not the type of game he plays. Obviously, the shot is an asset. He's being outproduced right now by a draft-eligible defenseman on his team, Oliver Bonk, who is the son of former NHL Radek Bonk, which makes me feel so old. But it's
get in line, Lauren.
I know. But it's just, for Mailloux, it's not the production that you would kind of expect to see from like a draft +2 player. You know, he's 2 seasons removed from his draft year now. You know, I feel like the production, you know, if you're going to call him, you know, that kind of offensive-minded defenseman, you know, I feel like he should be producing a little bit more than he is right now. Obviously, maybe that's just the system London plays. Their forwards generate a lot of the offense as opposed to coming from the back end. I mean, it's difficult to say right now what he's probably going to project as long-term. A year in the AHL probably wouldn't hurt. I think it's unfair to expect him to, step into the Canadiens lineup next season and be, a bottom four defenseman, because I don't think we've quite seen enough yet to suggest that he's ready for that role.
Right, and this is the thing. People keep pairing him with Caden Gooley, and I'm like, pump the brakes. Let's see him play a full season. And again, like it's really not to be dismissive of him. Like, we've had so many conversations about like our feelings about the pick. It's just that you need to see a lot more, right? And again, like, Lauren, you just mentioned draft plus 2, right? But then again, like, he didn't play for so long, so you got to give him that many games before you can crown him anything, really. And I think if he even like makes the NHL, like, I think that to me is like, well, I would, not that I would be shocked, but I feel like that would be like him achieving expectation, is him like just simply making the NHL lineup. So
Right.
the AHL might actually be a great place for him next season, but we'll see what happens. And I think now I want to talk about the delightful boy, Vinzenz Rohrer, who is just, he seems like such a ray of sunshine. Like, I love this kid. So let's talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, not much to say really about Rohrer. I mean, he's picked up exactly where he left off last season. I think, I used the phrase "delightful violence." Here's the thing: like, he's a very unique player in that he blends this unique combination of physicality but also finesse. So he can, lay a hit, or he can, score a really pretty goal by dangling through a whole bunch of players before roofing the puck on the goalie. And that's kind of where it's like, is this, kind of the tale of two players? Can he use that physicality and kind of bring the offense a little bit, marry them together even more this season? And I think that's true. I think he's managed to do that. I mean, the production is really taken off. Obviously, we talk about situation. Ottawa is the best team in the OHL this season. They went on 2 9-game winning streaks, which is kind of insane. But, obviously playing on a team that good helps a lot. But the production, as far as he's creating chances on every shift, they may not always be going in, but he's, a threat to score. He's, hardest worker usually on the ice, always, laying hits, using his body positioning to get inside track on players, great board play, reverse hits. He loves the reverse hits. And that's just kind of where, this is a player that is probably going to be this player at a future level. And, that's really all, the Canadiens can ask for, is that he can continue to, play the style of game and adapt to, future levels, whether it's the AHL or the NHL, bring that physicality, and then the offense will come eventually.
I love the phrase delightful violence, but just so that I could make it 3 in a row with a shot against the Ottawa Senators, Ottawa in the OHL, 9-game winning streaks, multiple. Ottawa in the NHL, no game winning streaks. Lots of losing streaks.
I love that.
And that's 3 out of the 6 episodes I'm hosting by myself. Let's see if I can do all 6. Let's see if I can find a way to work it into all 6. In the meantime, Lauren, I just want to ask you one more question. Given that we right now don't know where the Habs are going to draft, we expected a top 5 pick, but now it's looking more like maybe a top 7, top 8 pick. Is there anyone that in the early going in the OHL has kind of stood out to you in that spot? Like, we were talking about Allen in the previous segment. I really thought that like he might be somebody that they could pick up if they were like in the 7, 8, 9 spot. But now I'm thinking maybe let's look at somebody else. Like, are there any people that you have your eye on that are in that like 7, 8 spot in the early going, again, like at the end of the season, things might change, that you really think is worth a look at from Habs fans when they're watching the OHL?
Here's the thing about how I feel about the OHL draft eligible prospects this season is I don't like most of them, which is really, really bad. Like, I mean, they're good players, but some are, they're not exciting, or they're boring, or, the offense isn't there, or they're struggling out of the gate. It's a lot of more uncertainty than I felt like there was last year for the draft, or at least, I don't know, maybe Owen Beck is just like that good. And I was like, he's the guy. I don't care where you pick, but he's the guy. And I guess probably out of the OHL, the best prospect right now is Callum Ritchie. He plays in Oshawa. Really, really smart, cerebral player. It's very similar to Owen Beck. More offensive minded at times. My concerns with him are, pace. He's a little bit slower. As a bigger frame player, skating will need some work as far as acceleration and edge work goes. And pace, sometimes he can disappear for games for a few shifts. And then 3 shifts later, he's dangling some poor defender out of his jockstrap. So that's the kind of player, I think he's probably the most consistent throughout right now. Colby Barlow in Owen Sound has made a big push recently offensively. He's another guy who could probably be a top 20 pick next summer. Allen, it's just so uncertain right now. I mean, there are games where I've watched him and I haven't even thought he was worth a first round pick, let alone a top 15 pick. So, it's a waiting game with Allen. I mean, I'm confident that he's a good enough player to kind of get himself out of it. I feel like he needs to get sat down by the coaches and told to relax sometimes, because I feel bad. I mean, it looks like he's just trying to do everything. And no player can do everything. And I feel like it's really, really hurting his confidence. So I feel kind of bad, but hopefully, at the start of the new year, he's able to flip the switch kind of, and at least be a more calm player, not so sporadic in his own end. And, the production also hasn't been there with Allen. So hopefully that kind of lends itself to, more offense and more production down the road.
And who among us cannot relate to that? Honestly, like when you're trying to do too much and then your production suffers. Like I think we've all been there. And that could work in the Habs' favor, right? Like they're trying to acquire another first round pick. They've already got Florida's. They've got their own. So I think if he ends up recovering his consistency a little bit and they see something in him, like he might be one of those people that's worth taking a little bit of a chance on, like a lot later in the first round where the Habs are projected to pick themselves. So I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on, because if he can't right the ship, then I have so many question marks. But if he can figure it out and pull out some consistency for the remainder of the season, I think that's a very good sign. Because, I mean, you look at Cole Caulfield last year, he struggled for half the season. Like, he scored 1 goal, and he's supposed to be a top player, right? And then he figured it out. So if he can figure it out, like, I think I have a little bit more faith in Allen. Because the reason that I ask is one of our listeners is related to him. So, like,
I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. I think we're all being realistic here. Like the numbers are there. It's right there. It's in front of our eyes. He's not doing that great.
Hey, I believe in him. I want him to turn it around. Okay.
Right? That's what we want. Like, we definitely want that. And that's why I'm like, maybe he can figure it out, and maybe the Habs can take a chance on him. Cause I haven't ruled him out, right? Like, he's not off my draft board. So, I want to say thank you to Lauren. Lauren, can you tell people where they can find your work?
Yeah, right now, while Twitter is still alive, you can follow me at LauraKelly24. I don't always post about prospects, but I try to do it more. And actually, this week, an article is going up on EP Rinkside that I am writing that features 4 Montreal Canadiens prospects and how they're doing. And so that'll come out later this week. So if you guys want to check that out, that'll be at eprinkside.com. You will need a subscription to read it, but you should subscribe anyways, because we got a lot of great stories and articles and insight on there.
And Scott and I swear by it. We really do. Like we've had a lot of public scouts on the show, and I think like EP has been one of our go-tos for information, particularly as the Habs have sucked. Like, it's been like, let's look at the prospects and stuff like that. And Lauren, honestly, this was a really delightful episode. Like, it went by so fast. I'm so grateful to you for your time, because I really, really enjoyed this chat.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you. And I hope you'll come back, because we've got to check in on Owen Beck again. We might have to revisit that conversation about Allen as well.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, I need no excuse to talk about Owen Beck. So
thank you so much. And for all the rest of you, my episode tomorrow will be a crossover with JD Young of Locked On Sharks after the Habs Sharks game. If you want to find us on Twitter, we're at LO_Canadiens. If you want to email us, we're LockedOnCanadiens@gmail.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And if you like us, please tell your friends. This episode, come on, like, you'll get guests like Lauren again. So please subscribe, tell everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.